All right, everybody. As promised, we are going to do the weekly photo challenge review. As you see, the rule of thirds here for certified photo training. It's funny because we're recording our screen and recording my face with our new production area now. And I actually already went through and judged all these and went over each one, and I accidentally made the mistake and recorded the wrong screen. So I'm here doing it again. Which isn't a problem because now I can go into more detail into some of my thoughts. So with that said, we are going to go into the rule of thirds challenge of this week. And what we do here is I like to spread them all out, and I'm going to hide this bar here. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of Photoshop tweaks now that I've been through it once. I like to just kind of pick them at random. And where I want to start, I think, is where we should do first is just kind of eeny, meeny, miny, moe it. And the first one that pops up here is, and I know this is Ashley's, and we've been working with Ashley a lot on her AFC. And if you don't know what AFC is, it is autofocus continuous. It's called different things on different cameras, but the idea is that you can pick a certain amount of focusing dots on your camera and then track something that's in motion, which is it's a struggle to do. It's not an easy thing to do, and it does take practice and anticipation and panning and all kinds of different photography techniques. But we've been working with Ashley in the private group lately, and she crushed this one. She did a really, really good job here. And I know she's been working on her AFC a lot, and she does equestrian photography. So it's something that she needs to be good at, and she's learning now that it's not as hard as she thinks it is once you start practicing it. And I know this is dressage, so I can imagine the pace that they're at. I don't remember what shutter speed this was at. I think it was 1/500th, which would have put it at a little bit higher of an ISO with the lighting that she's in. But this is excellent. I'm struggling a little bit on the rule of thirds. It's definitely a good balance. I wouldn't enter this photo into the rule of thirds challenge. I would enter this into something else. Just because I mean, you definitely are playing on the rule of thirds, but it's like, it's not so much so where it's an obvious, and that's good. I'm more impressed with just the execution of the photograph itself. Very well executed, well exposed, sharp. Zooming in on that bad boy. I mean, we're sharp all around. And and this is a low ISO. This is an excellent image. This is just excellent. Nice little blur there. Yeah, good job, Ashley. Nice work. Nice work. Moving on to this image here, we're just let it pop up at random and just go through them. And we're going to give you criticism, constructive criticism, and just little tips and things. And what I think what people really like about this process is you guys get to learn from each other. So as I go through these images, you get to learn from each other. With that said, you probably noticed that I haven't been in the group lately a lot. I mean, I've been trying. I've been doing a lot of client work and then teaching the students in the private group. But we're going to continue to do these reviews. So we're going to do the weekly challenges, and then we're going to do the weekly reviews here because this is actually really cool. Our new setup and just the way everything's laid out, and I can light myself in the studio, which is really nice. So moving on to this image here. I noticed this one come through now. We're going to talk about autofocus AFS, single focus or single shot on Canon. On Canon, and when you use a focusing die, and we're talking about like a point, like an actual point of your, a focal point. We're going to be talking about focal points a lot, and the difference between focal point and focusing. Here, your focal point is actually right here on the stem, and I want everybody to imagine when you actually focus on something, you're actually creating a horizontal plane, a focal plane, okay? So when you dissect an image, you can really break it down to what really happened here, okay? So I'm gonna guess that whatever happened here was, the focus is most definitely right here. You know what I mean? Like, this is the sharpest area. If you compare that to the fringes of the mushroom, you can tell that this is much sharper. See what I'm saying? So you focus on the stem, which makes sense because the top of the mushroom's also in focus. You see that? Like, this is sharp, but this is blurred. So you can see how that's a horizontal plane. Hopefully that makes sense. Since you focus on the stem and the stem is upright, anything that's on the same in space, the same area in space will be focused as well. Anything that's away from that area in space in a radial fashion is your depth of field, which is what you're seeing here. But what I would like to see here, since what would be closest to the camera would be the edge of the mushroom here. What I would really like to see is that to be at focus, or you shoot at a higher aperture to get a sharper image and less depth of field, and that would solve that too. Not that it's a problem at all. It's just I want to be able to see the texture underneath the mushroom itself, and I'm not able to see that because it's not in focus. But I remember, Victor, we were talking about how you're down on the ground for this one, which is pretty cool. I appreciate that kind of dedication to laying in the wet grass and doing that kind of thing. Misty Bernard, I know this one's yours. Misty's in my class too. She's in my Framing the Future class. And we've been talking about focus versus focusing point a lot. And here, as you can tell, she understands that anytime you pull your camera, this is what I like to tell people, it's like anything, whatever reason you pull your camera out for, is the reason that it was probably what you're gonna be focusing on, okay? 85, 90% of the time. Whatever, I want you to imagine, whatever you're pulling your camera out for, there's probably what you want to be the sharpest part of your image, right? You know, you're pulling your camera out to take a photo of a truck, you're gonna want that truck to be the sharpest part. You know what I mean? So and that's an 85%, 90% rule that I like to say. But then we play the rule of thirds. So when you have a rule of thirds challenge like this, you're gonna want your focal point to be on the rule of thirds intersection of some kind. And that's what Misty Bernard here, and again, it's like a point, okay? It's think of a needle point, okay? Imagine a needle point, and that's focal point, and then focusing is not as precise. So focal point, there's focal point, which you do with AFS or single shot. And like I said, this is what you're after. Whatever you pull your camera out for, this is what you're gonna want to be focusing on. Your focal point, you have to understand that in order to get a tack sharp image with the detail, the high detail like that, you have to have your focus accurate, but your focal point needs to be accurate too, and it needs to have no motion blur. So fast shutter speeds, and I know Misty was at 500th of a second here, and I know this is her little squirrel named Felix that she feeds, which is pretty cute, and you can see it. Look at how sharp that is. You can even see, if you look closely, you can see that catch light in the eye, okay? And that's what really makes photographs have depth, and we talk a lot about in Frame Your Future about training your eye to see the world in 2 dimensions, because you have to imagine that as humans, we have 2 eyes, and we're walking around with two eyes seeing everything in 3 dimensions, but your camera only has 1 eye, its lens, okay? So that's why it takes photographs in 2 dimensions. And we lean into that pretty hard, is training your eye that way, and Misty clearly is training your eye that way. And you can turn an image that is 2-dimensional and make it more 3-dimensional, not actually 3-dimensional, but more 3-dimensional with highlights, midtones, and shadows, accurate focus, accurate exposure, and then depth of field like she did here. I mean, look how much this squirrel stands out from the background. You do that with, I don't know what aperture she's right, 5.6. I don't know what focal length she's at either. But the point of the matter is you use low apertures in order to get that blur around the photo itself, or the subject itself. So that was excellent. I saw this image come through, and this is storytelling. This is my type of storytelling. This, to me, tells an excellent story, and then there was the nitpicker in me that wants to nitpick it. So that's what I did, is when I see a perfect image like this, I nitpick it. Okay, so don't feel bad when I nitpick this, because when you have a perfect image like this, and this tells its own story, there's nothing I would really change photographically about this, but there's something that I would change logistically, and that would be either having this car moved, which is overkill for a shot like this, but you can Photoshop it out. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. And just little things that may draw the viewer's attention away. You know, I'm using the clone stamp tool right now. Just Photoshopping little stuff out, and this is rough Photoshop, everybody. I'm not going to take the time to Photoshop low-res images, but I'm going to give you the tools in order to accomplish it. Okay. So what I'm using is the clone stamp right now, and I'm source clicking here, and I'm moving along there, And so if I went in at a fine rate there, I could remove that car. And again, that's not a good Photoshop job at all. But the point of the matter is, I see something else back there when I want to nitpick it. So other than that, triple thumbs up here. This is excellent, excellent work. The focus is there, the exposure is there, even the color tone is there. You know, you got that nice bluish green with the autumn leaves, and it's all right there. I mean, that's just excellent. Here, we're gonna talk about daylight, and we're gonna talk about your relationship, there's you as the photographer, then there's the sun, and then there's the subject that you're photographing, okay? So there's those three elements that you have to keep into consideration when you're photographing outdoors, especially in bright sunlight, okay? You should be doing it all the time when you're photographing in any situation other than the studio. You should always be thinking about you as the photographer, your light source, and your subject. And where are those in relationship to each other is you have to keep that in mind at all times. So that's why you run into problems when you do direct sunlight. And when you're photographing in direct sunlight, like you see here, you'll notice this the refraction, this lens flare going on here. So what this actually is when you're shooting directly into the sun, your lens has different layers of glass throughout the lens, and depending what zoom lens you have or fixed lens that you have, if those lens rays are entering in a certain way, you're actually catching the refraction of an element of glass, because there's multiple elements of glass. You know, there's multiple elements of glass in a lens. And the more zoom lens that you have, the more elements of glass that there are, because you got to imagine the magnification that it takes in order to zoom that much. Okay, so just keep that in mind. You're always going to run into that, and a good way to get around that is a lens hood. So if you're not using a lens hood, because you can put the front of your lens in shade by using a lens hood, and that's ultimately what they're used for, and to protect your lens itself. But more so would be to protect against refraction and lens flares like that. So and the idea behind a lens hood is it puts that front element of glass of your lens, it actually puts it in shade. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So that there's no light rays entering it directly. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. All right, this was Mike Kelly's image that came through. This is excellent storytelling, and I love a great storytelling photographer. I have a couple of gripes with this image, one of which being this car. It's not a great choice of a vehicle, and not that you had a choice. So trust me, I do my then and now artwork all the time, and I run into this all the time. But you have to keep that in, like maybe it would have been better for you to wait or something like that. Maybe it would have been better for you to have wait for that car to have moved. And that's a determination that comes into a storytelling photographer. Photojournalists are really good storytelling photographers, and that's somebody you could look into. What I really like about this is the vanishing point of the road, and then the bicyclist coming down the road there. And I really like the panorama of this. I usually don't like a crop, and that's my personal opinion. But this image is really good, except for, like I said, we talked about this, I think, in a private message there, Mike. This one's just lacking like a solid focal point. And I think it's maybe here, but it's just unclear. And that's something you can work on. Francis, you don't need any help, man. This is just really excellent, man. This is just really, really good. And what's really cool about this photograph here is this is 1/500, I think it was 1/500th of a second. And those fidget spinners spin so fast that you almost wouldn't guess that. So the idea of dropping this, catching it in motion with the lighting that it has on it while it's in focus, and catching the motion blur all at once was not an easy shot. Many thumbs up. This is just an excellent photograph right here. I mean, this is one of the better photographs I've seen in a long time. And then this one came through. This one's a really great image. This is a really great editing too. I'm gonna just change the color there. This one's a really, I mean, you couldn't be more, when I bring up these grid lines, what I'm actually doing here is bringing up the rule of thirds grid lines. So you can actually see what the rule of thirds is here. And again, it's more of a balance than it is anything, but you do want to try to place whatever your subject is on an intersecting rule of thirds, or play on one sort of the rule of thirds or sectors. You can play them as sectors too. You can play them as different sectors too. So that's what I say with rule of thirds is more of a balance than it is like landing on the guideline perfectly, if that makes sense. Because you don't have to land on the guideline perfectly. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can do whatever you want when you know the rules. You can do whatever you want. But this is a great execution. Again, when you're doing a rule of thirds challenge like this, or when you're just photographing anything at the rule of thirds, you're gonna want your focal point. Remember we talked about that focal point, you know? That focal point, you're gonna wanna put it right where your rule of thirds is intersecting. If your element is there, whatever is in your photograph is there. And that's what is done here. And then with some really great post-production and a great time of day, I mean, this is just pure excellence. And this photograph came through, and this is a HDR image, I think. This came through 3 different images stacked together. And that's why you're seeing so much sharpness. That's why you're seeing so much detail in both the foreground and the background, because there's multiple focal points here, and I think there's multiple exposures as well. And I think these birds were added too. It's really difficult to tell sometimes exactly specific things that I want to know, just because there's not enough resolution there to tell. Maybe that was all there. That's probably one of the layers, huh? There's nothing to nitpick here. I mean, this is great storytelling here. You got the boat out here. You've got the birds flying there. You've got a great time of day on the lighthouse. Everything is high detail. If there was honestly one thing for me to nitpick about this is, my opinion is I don't like to see unnatural focal points. To me, it's like there's too much detail where there shouldn't be. But again, that's my opinion. I mean, this will sell really well. So don't take that opinion with a grain of salt. I just know photography, and knowing with one image you cannot get that much detail with that much depth, and you do get that much detail and depth by doing HDR, which you did an excellent job. There's nothing here to nitpick, and even you got your edges of your frame straight and your horizon straight. There's not a single shred of this image that has a wasted space to it, so you did a really good job here. This is one of the, yeah, definitely. This image here, this one is really low to the ground. This is my brother's image here. And this is our cat, Cyrus. And we think she's pregnant, and she's actually making a den over here. So this image is a great storytelling image, because to us, this will remind us forever of this memory, if that makes sense to you. This is storytelling right here. Again, storytelling will vary from person to person depending who's interpreting the image, but the idea of you shooting it in a storytelling way will make your photography better quickly, okay? And trust me, Dan's not even very good, and this is a really good image. No, I'm just kidding. This image is really good because, like I said, it tells a story, and you can see here in the foreground, you can see a little bit of the depth of field. And I think it was at f5.6 here, and you can actually see the focal plane in the grass. I mean, you can actually see that focal plane. You see that? This horizontal wall of focus, and that's where you get that by selectively focusing using AFS or single shot on the head of your subject usually. And you'll see that focal plane. And the lower your aperture, the shallower your focal plane will be. So you won't have as much of a focal plane to play with. But we talk more about that in our class. I could talk for hours on focal planes. All right, this image here, I want to talk about this image here because this is a great play on the rule of thirds as I bring up the grid lines there, as you see here. But I feel like when I see this image, I want you to envision where the sun is in this photograph. And it's to the left-hand side here. It's over here, okay? So the sun's over here, and the shadow's falling this way. What I want to see is I want to see the head on this side. You see what I mean there? The part of me wants to do that and just do this. I'll show you a little preview of what we do in class here. And this is a big stretch. But, you know, when you have your light sources, you sometimes, let me just show you quick. This is just going to be a rough edit, so I apologize if I offend you by doing this. But this is just what my opinion is, and that's why you're watching. So just let me know what you think. if you were to, you know, not do this in Photoshop, but actually photograph it in this way. But this is a demonstration of how I would rather, oh, that moved. I would rather see it that way, but photograph that way. Does that make sense? Like, since the sun is over here, you want your subject to be looking through your image instead of like being on the edge of the image where it's looking outside of your image. Does that make sense? Hopefully. And that's my opinion, but also it's not just my own opinion. It's a very shared opinion. And it probably could be proved through money. But here, this image here, this is really great because what you can do in sunsets like this, when you catch a sunset like this and you're catching the actual sun reflecting off of the clouds like this, the more that you underexpose your image, the darker the image is going to get. But when you do that with a backlit cloud from the sun, you can actually enrich your colors that much more. So this is a really great example of that. And the more that you would darken your image here, the richer and more rich this color detail would be. And I do that all the time. And that's also how you create silhouettes here. And that's this is sort of silhouetted. It's got a little bit of detail to it. Maybe it is completely, it's hard to tell in Facebook images. But I know this image, this is Victor's image. This is a perfection image. When I bring up the grid lines there, look at how much those line up, okay? He took his camera out, he composed this shot, he moved his focus over here, and he focused where those intersecting lines and lined up those intersecting lines and his focusing dot and his subject. And that was his composition. And then he framed it, turned it, or whatever. And then the amount of light. So this is really neat because you have a perfectly lit subject, but then you also have deep and rich shadows here, but you also have bright highlights around the image, which causes the viewer's eye to dance around. And ultimately, that's what sells everybody. That's what sells in photography, is that dancing around of the image. You want to create that depth. You want to create that high detail depth. And I mean, this has it all. I mean, this image has it all. Look at how sharp that is. You can even see the detail. You can even see the shadow of this little limb here. See that? I think that's really neat. I think that's excellent. I don't know how we're going to judge this contest, to be honest with you. So Kia, you got to make sure you help me with that this week, tonight. This image here, Christina's in my class, and she's been shooting really well. I mean, her focal points are always accurate. She's shooting extremely consistent, which is really my goal with my students in class, is to get them shooting consistently, okay? And that's what makes a great photographer. You need to be consistent so you can do the rest of this stuff. So you can do the business stuff, so you can do the interacting with your clients and the whatever, you know, whatever else. You have to be able to do that first, okay? And then you got to do your post-production, which Christina has been excelling at significantly. This is a great representation of a great tonal range that an image would have in black and white. So you have bright highlights in the skin, and then you got deep shadows, and you've got everything in between. So that's what this makes this image have so much impact. And I bet if you were to see a high resolution of this image, it would be pretty impressive. Yeah. That's why Facebook, it's really, trust me, I feel everybody on that too. The Facebook compression, it sucks. So, but know that we keep into consideration that. Okay, I remember seeing this one come through, and I remember Kia talked and responded about this one, about having the scattered light, and that will throw off your camera's light meter. But one of the things you're gonna wanna do here is your camera picked up its focus right here. So if you were on AFS or single shot and selectively focused on the face, you would be in great shape here, okay? But the camera automatically focused right there, which is one of the problems of focusing versus single shot or AFS. I always use AFS. I mean, 95% of the time, or a manual focus with my other cameras. But if I'm using a digital camera, 95% of the time, I'm on AFS, yeah. So this is Shane's image, and this one had a really great play in the rule of thirds. You know, and like I said, rule of thirds is more of a balance, and it doesn't have to intersect. And what I thought was really cool about this image was it says focus. I don't know if that's supposed to say focus on rock. And so did you focus on the rock? Exposure is great. Focus is looking pretty good. I don't know if you focused here or if you focused here, but I feel like you should focus here since there's writing. So I'm not sure. Again, it's hard to tell on the Facebook images. Now this one, I want to talk about this one image for a second. This one here is, so this image I just feel like is like missing like a specific element. Like we were talking about like how like, now into this sound, think of this sound. Okay, so those last two little bumps, like watch when I do it without it. Oh, I did it. See, there it is right there. So it's like when you have an image that it's symmetrical and the exposure is good and everything else is good, and it's almost like it's missing a piece. So like even just somebody at the end, you know, standing there or something like that, you know, it's just, it's empty. You know, it's a desolate image, so you need something that draws the attention more than the symmetry itself. Now, I know this is Caroline's image, and she's got this new pup. Excellent work. Again, watch the rule of thirds. Will be pretty close to the eye. And again, that's the rule of thirds. See, you can play it in sectors, too. So you can play it in sectors like this, too. So you can see the paw is playing on a rule of thirds sector, too. Now, remember, if you're playing rule of thirds, then you have 9 sectors. So again, you balance the sectors that way too. And like I said, the beginner interpretation of the rule of thirds is one line, okay? And then an intermediate interpretation of the rule of thirds is the intersecting line. And then an advanced interpretation of the rule of thirds would be interpreting as individual sectors of lines. And then, you know, maybe in even more advanced interpretation would be individual sectors, okay? So it's a balance, okay? And this image has everything. It's got great tonal range, it's got great sharpness, great focal point. I can see exactly where the sharpest area of the image is. That's your focal point. Remember, we talked about that, the focal point. And then it's a great black and white. So it's just, I don't know how we're gonna judge this challenge, to be honest with you. And that's it. That looks like that was all of the images, and I hope you guys appreciate us doing these weekly photo challenges reviews. I think everybody gains from it. I think everybody learns from everybody else's work, and I think that's really excellent. And we will continue to do them and then judge the challenges and then announce the challenges. So with that said, hopefully you enjoyed the Rule of Thirds weekly review with the Certified Photo Training, and we will see you next week.